fans, welcome back to Room 237, and yes, I'm in my temporary setting. Uh, kind of bittersweet because my last video, the review for The Batman 2022, was the last video in the previous apartment. I kind of wish I said something in it, but I didn't know. This is the living room of the new house. The back bedroom is being turned into Room 237, my sort of YouTube studio. It's in complete disarray right now, so I figured for the time being, this will be just fine. And I don't think I've done a video here since I did a muck, however long ago that was. But, yeah, this is kind of a random movie. I know I've been doing A24 and IFC films. For right now, I don't have Wi-Fi hooked up, so I kind of got to go back to DVDs I've had and haven't got to yet, and that's what this one is. This is a movie I've wanted to see for a very, very long time, but for whatever reason, it's not the easiest to find unless you go straight to Amazon or something. And you might be surprised because if you follow my channel, you know I typically am not a fan of this subgenre of horror. Although I am of this era, mostly more modern ones. But it is 1982's The Entity. Now, I know there's a Blu-ray of this. I think there's even a newer, because this is from Anchor Bay. But the store I go to, I searched endlessly for this, and they could never get it. And then I saw it for like $4 one day, had to buy it, and now I see it everywhere. But I've wanted to see this ever since the first time I saw Inglourious Basterds, which is still my favorite Tarantino film, because there is a piece of music in Inglourious Basterds that is pretty much the main theme for this. The score was done by Charles Bernstein, who did Nightmare on Elm Street. He's done a lot. I have the tablet set up so I can just look at this Wikipedia, so I can't click on to see what other people have done. But he's a very prolific composer. And specifically, the piece is called Bath Attack because I think the theme music, it changes tempo and has a little bit of different instrumentation throughout different parts. But the one in Inglourious Basterds is during the infamous, probably the most remembered scene of the film, which is when Barbara Hershey is in the bathroom being attacked. Now, it was directed by Sidney Furie, who would go on to do Superman 4. This is a much better movie. And it stars Barbara Hershey very, very well. I will have to say this is probably one of my favorite horror movie performances from an actress, specifically from the 80s. Also stars Ron Silver, who I know has been a villain in a lot of action films. He reminded me of George Eastman, which if you've seen a lot of Italian films, you know who George Eastman is. Mixed with, and I cannot remember his name, he was one of the boyfriends in the original Wrong Turn. He was in another movie called Population something. It's on Netflix. I can't remember his name, but Ron Silver reminded me of him in this. And the thing about this movie is it came out in 1982, but it was filmed, made in time, and planned for a 1981 release. But it was pushed back, and it got released. Some places it was 82, some places it was 83, but it's a 1982 release, which was the same year that Poltergeist came out. And this movie is very, very similar to Poltergeist. As far as, okay, it's this sort of, it is kind of a poltergeist kind of haunting, or spirit, or entity. And even the structure of the film, how she goes through all this different methods of help. Then eventually the parapsychologists come in. They do this experiment to, solve the problem. Which I will say the third act is where it kind of loses me, but the first two acts are great. I really enjoyed this movie. And it really is Poltergeist, but much darker, much grittier, and without the Spielberg wholesomeness. And yes, I know Poltergeist was directed by Tobe Hooper, but like everything Spielberg even touched at that time became very much a product of his. And but instead of like throwing things around and moving objects, even though that does happen, the real goal of this unseen entity, it plays out, at least the first half plays out a lot like a movie like Hollow Man, or the remake of The Invisible Man, which I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite remakes, one of my favorite horror films of the 2010s. I loved the new Invisible Man. It plays out like that because this entity, it's a sexual assault type of entity. That's its goal. It keeps assaulting Barbara Hershey. And as it says on the cover and in all the advertisements, it is based on a true story. It's based on a 1974 case of a woman named Doris Bither, who claimed to have been sexually assaulted by an unseen entity on several occasions. Now, the difference, between a supernatural horror film that says based on a true story of this period and one of the last 12 years or so is it tries to be as faithful as possible. I mean, kind of like Amityville, which this is also based on a book, in which the book is about the true story. Now, the movie says the case was in 1976, but I think that's when the book came out. And as far as Amity goes, I think Amityville, the movie, told like the murders properly, but a lot of the hauntings was kind of exaggerated. Whereas with this, I think a lot of, as far as her claims, sexual assault, like in the bedroom, in the bathroom, I don't know what it says about the scene in which she's driving and the car gets taken over. But also, like, when her son tries to help her, it gets thrown across the room, it gets his hand broken. And how she comes across the parapsychologists and how they come to help her in their first interaction with her. That's all, I guess, pretty much what happens. Because there's a feature on here called the Entity Files, which is it features a parapsychologist, Dr. Barry Taff, who was one of the parapsychologists in this case. I don't really remember as far as the experiment at the end of the film, but I know a lot of the smaller parts in like the first half is fairly true, at least to the given accounts and testimonies. But the difference between that and a supernatural horror film is based on a true story of today is there could be like Annabelle. It was a Raggedy Ann doll that might have, shifted a little bit. And they made an entire movie with a totally different looking doll. Where, there's this house where a curtain blew. And they create this whole... it's bullshit, basically. And even though I'm not a fan of supernatural paranormal horror films, I do love ones of this era. I mean, The Shining, my favorite film of all time. Love The Changeling with George C. Scott. I love John Carpenter's The Fog, this, Poltergeist, Amityville Horror. There are a lot that I do like. It just depends on the era, how it was made, and this is very competently made. The way the attack scenes are shot, like this is during the famous bath scene, which, which yes, she is being the R word. I don't know if I can say it, but it mostly shows Barbara Hershey up close, and it's done more tastefully, I guess. But this is also an excellent exercise in how and why music can really get the point across. Because that piece of music, which is just this pounding, like, with just this very deep in the background, even though you're pretty much seeing just her reaction, that music lets you know what's going on. And even before I knew about this movie and I just heard it in Inglourious Basterds, that music just sounded like pure anxiety and violation. Like, if those two things had a sound, it would be the theme to this. And so, even though it doesn't go full out like a lot of horror movies tend to do, and it shows very little, it's just as effective. That music helps. Barbara Hershey's acting helps. The way it's shot helps get it across. And I know Barbara Hershey was a struggling actress at this time. 2 years prior, she was in a movie called The Stuntman, which was sent to me a while ago by a friend of mine. Still need to see it. I will see it eventually. And then this. And then this is, that she worked with Woody Allen and went on to reach the acclaim that she very much deserves, because her performance in this, even though I cannot remember the actress's name, but I have seen the film Possession from, I believe, 1981 with Sam Neill. Even though she doesn't go maybe as far as that actress did, her believability is superb. You feel sorry for Barbara Hershey. You buy every emotion that she puts out. There's just little scenes where, because after the first couple of attacks, I mean, she's attacked in the bedroom in the very beginning. Then, I don't remember if the car gets taken over before or after the bath scene. But at one point, she does go stay with a friend. And the friend's house, just all the windows blow in. Everything gets messed up. And the friend and the husband come inside and they see that it happened. And at this point, everyone's just been telling her that she's crazy. So that's almost halfway into the film. So when she just hears her friend say, "I saw it," like, you just see the tears of joy. And she just keeps repeating, like, "You saw it? You saw it?" And you buy that she is that happy. And, just every emotion she does, totally believable. And she does go through this arc where she is, and some critics have interpreted this as female sexualized victimhood, where, yeah, she is, a victim of this entity, but also every male around her is trying to, question her sanity or whatever. And some people think that this movie had a feminist agenda, or is sort of a allegory for feminism. To me, it's just a movie with a very strong female character. I mean, she is rightfully frightened in the beginning because she was assaulted by this unseen thing. But just when nothing else works, I mean, by the end of the movie, she's like standing up to it. She's confronting it. She's going through this arc of being afraid and then conquering it. And Barbara Hershey did it in a very, very good way, a very powerful way. This is how you do strong female characters without forcing the agenda down someone's throat. It's effective. You care for the female lead. It doesn't feel forced. And you want to see her conquer this. Ron Silver as her psychiatrist, you get the idea that he might have more than a professional interest in her. But I like how it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't turn into a love story. It doesn't, make him, he kind of becomes the hero at the end. Not in a major way. He doesn't solve the problem, but he does help her at the end. And it doesn't start, a romance, which kind of helps make it a little bit more realistic. Something different than the norm, and kind of makes you care about him too. There are scenes where he does kind of have to be a bit abrasive, and this is a very actor-friendly movie. There are several scenes where these actors really get to show what they're made of. There is this one scene, I think it's like their third or whatever visit after Barbara Hershey starts to see Ron Silver as her psychiatrist, where he thinks it's some sort of psychological issue, and he's trying to get down to the base of it. And at this point, he's learned that, her father was a minister. At 16, she met this exciting, sort of rebellious, a motorcycle guy, fell in love with him, got pregnant, and then he got killed in a motorcycle accident. And then she had her teenage son. Some years later, she met a much older guy who, I think she kind of looked at to sort of take care of her. But she had her two girls with him, which one of the girls was the young daughter in the original Amityville Horror. So that's cool. I thought she looked familiar. And now she's dating this guy named Jerry, who is also much older and is really only around when it's convenient for him. He's always away on business trips and just stops by when he can. So he thinks that this entity is some sort of sexually, some sort of trauma, some sort of, I don't really know how to word it, but he thinks it's all in her head, brought on by this sort of fear or something that revolves around sex. And there is this great scene where he has this book full of just monsters and famous monsters and creatures throughout history. It says that these things have been created by people to sort of show their fear or show their wrongful desires. So he thinks it's like a projection of her. And he even states at one point, some people have said that he's implying that she wants to have sex with her son, because the bath scene, which is the most well shot, the most effective. Also, these scenes may feel very short. Like as soon as the starts, might last between 1 and 2 minutes. It's very quick, but it's just enough to get the point across, and it works. The it also just the way the bath attack is. There's that shot when she's like this. It's like her head's getting tossed to the beat of the music. And you see like her legs get separated, so she has all these bruises. And she says that the entity feels like a huge, strong man. And the ones holding her ankles were like two smaller beings. So he tries to tell her that maybe the big one and two smaller ones are sort of manifestations of the frustrations of her children, or the products of her children, or the products of sex, which is this fearful thing that she's always had, at least according to him. Then that's what turns her off from him. And actually, at that point, that's when she goes to the friend's house. Shit happens there. The friend believes her. And then, while they're at a bookstore getting paranormal books, she overhears these parapsychologists talking. So then she invites them over. And then that's when the third act begins. And it's also sort of this battle between the psychologist and parapsychologist. Ron Silver really thinks it's all in her head and doesn't believe the paranormal stuff at all. And it all leads up to this experiment where they want to capture the entity in, a controlled state, then trap it with liquid helium. That way they can show its objective proof, and which, when it gets to that experiment, that's kind of where it loses me. And only because totally it feels very different than the rest of the film. Uh, I liked the idea of this sort of brutal and violating sort of Invisible Man type ghost story. But if it had ended more like Amityville, where she's just had enough and just packs the kids and leaves, I would have been okay with that. Or sets the house on fire or whatever. Finds her own way to sort of stop it. Because it does get kind of hokey. And there are some hokey scenes. William Cruz did the visual effects, which there are some scenes with like blue electricity all over the ceiling, and even coming out of the son's hands when he tries to help her. Those effects I thought looked pretty decent. Usually the visual or optical effects of films of this era are the ones that look the most dated. Practical effects always look great. But I thought the electricity looked pretty decent. And I thought that was a nice touch. But then there's other parts where like these green orbs are shooting out of nowhere. That's kind of alright. But then there's this one scene where there's this green mist, almost like a Northern Lights. It's not so much that it looks kind of hokey, just I would have liked it better if they didn't do that. I like the idea that we never see it. And I guess in the true story, according to Dr. Taft, they did see this sort of green apparition that was in the shape of a very large bald man. This is just more kind of like a smog, it looks like. But then they go do their experiment, and even then, when she's in like the simulated house, there's like the liquid helium tanks with like a nozzle. She has to get to this one area that can be sealed off, then they can just blast it. But of course, the entity overrides that, makes the thing follow her. And it does look kind of silly. I mean, we've had this super serious, story where this ghost or this entity sexually violates this single mother. At one point, even in front of her kids, her young daughters, right after they got a huge Sunday. And again, Barbara Hershey's acting throughout all of it is flawless. So you have something with some pretty heavy content, but then when you kind of have the machines kind of following her around, totally it doesn't quite match up. And then even though I am always a sucker for miniatures and models for effects, this one did look kind of hokey, where it's this giant ice mound that you can tell it's a model, but when it starts to like shake and fall apart. And I like how their experiment doesn't work. Spoilers, but you know, the entity is able to blast out of it, which again is going with the true story thing. They can't come out and prove it. It's again just through these testimonies. So even though the experiment was a failure, I think it's the dean of the university, because the parapsychologist and Ron Silver are all from the university, is present. So he counts as a witness, basically. Is the whole thing as to whether it really happened or not kind of hinges on him. And it kind of leaves it ambiguous as to what he's going to say. And then it ends with captions like, this is based on one of the most extraordinary like cases of paranormal activity, and attacks on Barbara Hershey's character did continue to happen, but they were less frequent and less intense. But yeah, overall, I thought this was a very good ghost paranormal type movie. I would put it up there with Poltergeist. This would make a really good double feature. Only because they're very different totally. One is more of like your family film or sort of like your gateway horror film that still has some intense moments. Then you get to this that has all the violation, and again, the music really helps sell it. Most of the optical effects, like with the electricity, looks cool. All the attack scenes are, very well shot. Barbara Hershey's acting is excellent. Ron Silver does a great job as well. Barbara Hershey was also in Insidious and Black Swan, which I do need to review Black Swan. I'm surprised I haven't yet. But, so yeah, this would be up there for one of my favorite supernatural, paranormal sort of horror films. I wish it didn't take me so long to see it, but yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I know there was more I wanted to mention, but I'm sure it'll come to me after. Yeah, way better, way better than the paranormal films of the last 10, 12, 15 years or so. But yeah, the bath scene, after I saw Inglourious Bastards, and I really like that music, I want to get it as a ringtone. I looked it up, saw it was called Bath Attack, looked up where it was from, and I just saw the bathroom scene on YouTube. And I was just like, okay, now that looks like an intense ghost movie. And one other thing I could mention is, it is a little over 2 hours. It is 125 minutes. But it is very engrossing. It does pull you in. It never gets boring. It just kind of loses me totally towards the end. It's not that it gets boring, but I would definitely say the first half, definitely up until she meets the parapsychologist, is very solid. Very, very good. And I really like the two guys that played the parapsychologist. I thought they both did a good job. But that's kind of when the tone shifts, gets more sciencey, more like Poltergeist. But I do like the idea of doing, because I haven't seen a ghost movie like this. One, go this heavy with the material, like, okay, this ghost is raping you. But also just, that's also this well acted. Oh, also how it's shot. Uh, Sidney Fury has a lot of like sort of upward angle kind of diagonal shots that you see a lot during that time. There's a lot of what I would call De Palma shots where it's not necessarily split screen like Brian De Palma kind of trademarked, but I don't remember what kind of focus that was called, where like you have two characters sitting kind of like this, but they're both in focus. One is kind of fuzzy around them from where they had to edit them in perfectly. Some scenes are more seamless than others, but it is a very well shot film. And the cinematography was done by. For those that want to know, the novel was written by Frank DeFalina, if I pronounced that correctly. But yeah, the cinematography was done by Stephen H. Burham. And it does not say what the name of the book is called. I'm guessing it's The Entity. But, yeah, it is called The Entity. Duh. Which, he's credited with the screenplay as well. I don't know if it's because they use so much of the screenplay, like, past the percentage of credit, or if he actually did have a hand in writing it. But, yeah, very solid film. Definitely, certainly a top 10 ghost movie for me. Possibly even a top 5. But, yeah, if you're a fan of certainly Poltergeist, because that's what it's the closest to. Also, but with more of an approach like The New Invisible Man. But also like Amityville Horror. I wouldn't say The Fog. It's not quite like The Fog, but, you know, where it's specifically a family or a person being targeted, being messed with. I guess you could say The Changeling, but I would say I like The Changeling more. But this was a very, even though it is a lot like Poltergeist, I would say it is kind of a refreshing take on like a haunting movie. So yeah, that's 1982's The Entity. I really enjoyed it. As you know, I'm not the biggest fan of ghost movies, but I really enjoyed this. So I'm gonna try to get that bedroom, you know, put away and organized as much as possible. I do have a new desk, so I can set that up, try to make it look nice as possible, as soon as possible, because this, what you guys aren't seeing, is kind of an eyesore. But you can tell I haven't done a video in a while because I'm already losing my voice. But so yeah, this will be the setting for the time being. Still got a lot going on, but I'm going to try to make videos as frequently as possible. But you guys have been very supportive throughout all this chaos. So I thank you for that, and thank you for watching.